Have you ever noticed how the more you give, the less you are valued? You offer kindness, patience, and understanding, yet instead of earning respect, you are ignored, taken advantage of, or even belittled. This is not a coincidence. It is a fundamental truth of human nature, one that the Stoics understood well. Seneca warned against scattering one's generosity too freely, for people rarely appreciate what is given without effort. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "The world is full of those who act selfishly, but we must not let their nature dictate our own. Your kindness is a virtue, but like any virtue, it must be tempered with wisdom. If you do not set clear boundaries, others will test them. If you always yield, others will push further. And if you expect gratitude, you may be left disillusioned." In this video, we will uncover 5 reasons why your kindness sometimes leads to a loss of respect, and, more importantly, how to embody true generosity without being diminished by those who fail to recognize its worth. The answer is not to become cold or indifferent, but to stand firm, to give without expecting, and to cultivate a quiet strength that commands respect. If you seek to navigate life with greater clarity and resilience, subscribe to Stoic Lens and join our journey of personal and spiritual growth. Now, let's begin. Reason 1. Boundless kindness is seen as weakness. Kindness is a virtue, but even virtue must be tempered with wisdom. If you are always available, always willing to accommodate, always placing others' needs before your own, people will begin to see you not as a person of value, but as someone to be used. This is not because humanity is inherently cruel, but because it is in our nature to test limits. Where there are no boundaries, people will push further, not always out of malice, but because nothing has stopped them from doing so. Seneca once said, "A gift consists not in what is done or given, but in the intention of the giver." If your kindness is boundless, if it is given indiscriminately without discretion, it loses meaning. Just as a rare gem is treasured while common stones are overlooked, generosity that is always present begins to feel ordinary, expected. When kindness is assumed rather than appreciated, it ceases to be seen as a virtue and becomes an entitlement. Imagine a man in a marketplace who decides to give away his wares for free. At first, people are grateful, moved by his generosity, but as days pass, the gratitude fades. The crowd grows larger, hands reaching without thanks. Eventually, when he finally refuses to give something away, he is met not with understanding, but with anger. Not because he owes them anything, but because he has conditioned them to expect it. What was once a gift has become an obligation in the minds of those who received it. Your kindness follows the same principle. If you never draw boundaries, people will come to believe that none exist. If you always say yes, others will stop asking and start assuming. This is not a flaw of kindness itself, but a flaw in how it is wielded. A sword, no matter how sharp, is useless if never drawn. Strength is not found in endless giving, but in knowing when to give and when to hold back. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The power to control how you give your kindness lies with you. But if you do not exercise that control, others will take it from you. Think of a leader who never says no, who always bends to the wishes of others, who seeks only to please. Would such a person be respected, or would they be seen as weak, as someone easily swayed, as a figurehead rather than a force? The same applies in your personal life. People respect those who stand firm, who know their own worth, who are generous, but not to the point of self-sacrifice. Kindness is most powerful when it comes from a place of strength, not from a fear of rejection or a desire to be liked. There is a common mistake among those who value kindness. They believe that the more they give, the more they will be appreciated. But too often, the opposite is true. Instead of gratitude, they are met with expectation. Instead of warmth, they are met with disregard. This is because when something is always accessible, it loses its significance. A person who never demands respect will not receive it. A person who never asserts their limits will always be pushed further. This does not mean you should become harsh or unkind. Stoicism does not teach us to reject our nature, but to refine it. The solution is not to withhold kindness, but to give it wisely. Be generous, but with intention. Be available, but not at the cost of your own well-being. Say yes when it aligns with your values, and say no when it does not. If someone takes offense at your boundaries, that is not a reflection of your unkindness, but of their entitlement. Epictetus once said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." There will be times when standing firm will make you seem difficult, when saying no will make others uncomfortable, but a person who respects themselves does not live according to the fleeting opinions of others. True kindness is not about pleasing everyone. It is about acting with integrity, with strength, and with a clear understanding of your own worth. To live by this principle is not to reject generosity, but to wield it with wisdom, so that when you extend your hand, it is met with respect, not expectation. Reason 2. Your kindness reflects the insecurities of others. Not everyone is ready to receive kindness without suspicion. In a world where many have been conditioned to see generosity as a transaction, where every act is weighed for hidden motives, pure kindness can feel unsettling. When you extend a hand without expectation, when you give freely without seeking return, you become a living contradiction to the cynical mindset that governs so many. And for some, this is not a comfort, it is a threat. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Many people have suffered betrayals, disappointments, and wounds that have led them to believe that trust is a weakness, that kindness is a mask for manipulation." When such a person meets someone who acts with true generosity without calculation, it forces them to confront a painful question. What if my view of the world is incomplete? What if not everyone is selfish? What if the armor of mistrust I have built is not protecting me, but imprisoning me? For some, this realization is liberating, but for others, it is unbearable. Instead of facing the possibility that they have misjudged the world, they reject the person who forces them to see it differently. Your kindness, instead of being welcomed, becomes a mirror they do not wish to look into. It highlights what they lack: the ability to trust, to give without expectation, to embrace life without fear. And so, rather than acknowledge this, they push you away, dismissing your generosity as naive, weak, or even deceitful. Imagine a man who has lived his entire life preparing for battle. Every interaction is a negotiation, every favor is a debt, every relationship is a contest of power. One day he meets a traveler who offers him water without asking for anything in return. The soldier hesitates. Why would a stranger do this? Is the water poisoned? Is this a trick? His instinct is not to accept the gift, but to question it, to reject it. Because if he accepts, he must also accept that not everything in life is a struggle for advantage. And that realization would demand that he change, something far more difficult than simply dismissing the traveler as a fool. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." Those who see kindness as weakness, who respond to generosity with distrust or hostility, are often prisoners of their own thinking. They have built a worldview in which self-interest is the only rational path, and your presence threatens that belief. Rather than adjust their perspective, they cling to it more tightly, projecting their fears and insecurities onto you. This is why some people react negatively to kindness, not because they see you as weak, but because they fear what your kindness reveals about them. It forces them to confront the idea that there is another way to live, one that is not based on endless calculation and self-preservation. And rather than accept that possibility, they dismiss it outright. To them, it is easier to believe that you must have an ulterior motive, that your kindness must be a trick, that no one gives without expecting something in return. Think of the person who's been betrayed one too many times. They have learned to expect deception, to assume that kindness is always a prelude to exploitation. They no longer see generosity as a virtue, but as a warning sign. When they meet someone who is truly kind, their instinct is not to embrace it, but to push it away. They may mock it, reject it, or even act with hostility. Not because your kindness is wrong, but because it disrupts the world they have built for themselves. This has nothing to do with you and everything to do with them. You are not the cause of their cynicism. You are merely the mirror reflecting it back to them. Their rejection of your kindness is not a judgment of your character, but an attempt to protect themselves from questioning their own. To acknowledge your sincerity would require them to confront their own limitations, their own wounds, their own inability to trust. And for some, that is a battle they are not yet ready to fight. But that is not your burden to carry. The Stoics teach us that we cannot control the minds of others, only our own actions. You are not responsible for whether someone else accepts your kindness in the spirit it is given. Your task is only to act according to your nature, to be kind, because it aligns with your principles, not because you seek approval or gratitude. The world will always have those who scoff at generosity, who meet warmth with coldness, who mistake selflessness for foolishness. That is their struggle, not yours. Do not let their fears become your own. Do not let their cynicism harden your heart. Be kind, not because it is always understood, but because it is who you choose to be. A Stoic does not give to receive, nor does he allow the rejection of others to dictate his actions. He gives because it is in his nature to do so, and he remains unmoved by how the world chooses to respond. Reason. 3. Going against social norms creates resistance. We live in a world where power, dominance, and competition are often rewarded. Strength is admired, assertiveness is encouraged, and success is frequently measured by how well one can assert control over others. In such an environment, kindness can be seen as an anomaly. A person who chooses generosity over selfish gain, respect over arrogance, and fairness over manipulation does not fit easily into the rules that society has built for itself. You become the one who refuses to play the game, a game ruled by ego, opportunism, and an endless pursuit of advantage. But the moment you step outside these norms, you disrupt them. People are accustomed to a world where every action carries an expectation of return, where relationships are transactions, and where help is rarely given without a hidden cost. When they encounter someone who gives without seeking repayment, someone who acts out of principle rather than profit, it unsettles them. Your very existence challenges their way of thinking, forcing them to confront a possibility they may have long denied, that success does not have to come at the expense of integrity, that power is not the only path to fulfillment, and that kindness is not a weakness, but a choice. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." True freedom does not come from controlling others, but from refusing to be controlled by the expectations of the world. But freedom often comes at a price. Those who do not understand it may reject it, fear it, or even attack it. When you act with sincerity in a world that values deception, you expose the artificial nature of the masks others wear. Some will respect this, but others will react with hostility. Not because you have done them harm, but because your existence forces them to question their own. Imagine a man who has spent his entire life believing that ruthlessness is the only way to survive. He has played the game of power, stepped on others to climb higher, and justified every selfish act as necessary. Then, one day, he meets someone who chooses a different path, someone who helps without calculating a benefit, who treats others with fairness, even when there is no advantage in doing so. At first, he is confused. Then, he is angry. How can this person exist? If kindness is not weakness, then what does that say about his own choices? Has he wasted years chasing something that was never necessary? Has he justified his actions with illusions? Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one. But being good is not without consequence." When you walk the path of kindness in a world that does not always value it, you will encounter resistance. Some will mock you, calling you naive. Others will dismiss you, saying you do not understand how the world really works. And some will actively seek to undermine you, not because you have wronged them, but because you threaten the foundations upon which they have built their lives. This resistance does not mean you are wrong. It does not mean you should change. On the contrary, it is proof that you are walking a different path, a harder one, but a necessary one. Many people are trapped in cycles of ambition, competition, and fear, believing that they must conform to survive. When they see someone refusing to follow the same rules, they feel exposed. They react not to you, but to the discomfort you create within them. But their rejection is not your burden to carry. The Stoics teach that we cannot control how others perceive us, only how we choose to act. Do not allow their cynicism to make you cynical. Do not let their resistance shake your resolve. A Stoic does not live for the approval of others, nor does he bend to their judgments. He acts according to his principles, not because they are easy, but because they are right. This is why true kindness requires strength. To be kind in a world that does not always reward it is an act of defiance. To hold to your values in the face of rejection is a form of courage. And to continue forward, unmoved by mockery, is the mark of true wisdom. Those who resist you today may one day understand. And if they do not, it does not matter. Because your kindness is not for their acceptance, it is for the integrity of your own soul. Reason 4. Generosity is perceived as an invitation to sacrifice. There is a paradox in kindness. Those who give the most often find themselves overlooked. When you are always there, always listening, always helping, people begin to assume that you do not need anything in return. Your generosity, instead of being recognized as a conscious choice, is mistaken for an unchanging fact of your existence. Others start to take your presence for granted, as if your time and energy were limitless, as if you had no burdens of your own. This is how a dangerous cycle begins. The more available you are, the less others consider your needs. You become the pillar that supports everyone else, yet no one stops to ask if the pillar itself might be cracking. Not out of malice, but because you have trained them, through your own actions, to believe that you ask for nothing, that you are unshakable. And so, slowly, you fade into the background, not as a person with wants and struggles, but as a function, someone who exists only to serve. Seneca once wrote, "He who is everywhere is nowhere." When you stretch yourself too thin, when you give endlessly without setting limits, you lose something essential, yourself. Respect is not earned through self-sacrifice alone, but through balance. If you never assert your own needs, others will assume you have none. If you never say no, people will assume you are always willing. And if you do not protect your own space, you will find yourself drowning in the expectations of others. Imagine a man who gives away his firewood freely. Every night, people come to his home, taking from his pile without asking. At first, they are grateful, but over time, gratitude fades into habit. They assume he will always have more, that the fire will always burn. But one night, winter arrives, and the man has nothing left for himself. He sits in the cold, watching the warmth he once shared now lighting the homes of others, while he shivers in the darkness. Not because they meant to leave him with nothing, but because he never told them he needed anything in return. This is the danger of unchecked generosity. When you give without boundaries, you teach others to expect without question, not because they are cruel, but because people adapt to what is given freely. And when that generosity is suddenly withdrawn, when you finally say, "I cannot this time," they may not respond with understanding, but with confusion or even anger. Not because you owe them anything, but because they had come to believe that you did. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "Do not be ashamed of needing help. You have a duty to care for yourself as well as others." The lesson is clear. You cannot truly serve others if you allow yourself to be diminished in the process. There is no virtue in self-destruction. To give wisely, you must also protect your own well-being. To be a source of strength, you must ensure you are not being depleted. This does not mean withholding kindness or becoming selfish. It means understanding that true generosity includes yourself in its equation. It means saying, "I am here for you, but I also have my limits." It means recognizing that kindness without boundaries is not sustainable. The strongest trees do not give all their branches away. They grow deep roots so they can continue to stand, continue to provide shade, continue to give without falling. The shadow of generosity is this: the risk of becoming invisible, of existing only in function of what you provide. But true kindness is not about losing yourself. It is about knowing when to give and when to step back, so that what you offer remains a conscious choice, not an obligation. Reason 5. Your unlimited availability nullifies the value of your goodness. When something is always available, it is no longer appreciated. This is a simple but often overlooked truth about human nature. People value what is rare, what requires effort, what is not easily obtained. But when generosity is given endlessly without limits, it ceases to be seen as a gift and becomes an expectation. If you are always there, always ready to help, always willing to sacrifice your own needs for others, your kindness may start to fade into the background, noticed only when it is gone. Seneca once said, "Withdraw into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who will make a better man of you. Welcome those whom you can improve." This is not a call for isolation, but for discernment. Generosity, like any virtue, must be exercised with wisdom. If you give indiscriminately without considering when and to whom your kindness is best directed, it loses its meaning. When kindness becomes predictable, it stops being appreciated and starts being taken for granted. Imagine a candle that burns constantly in a room. At first, its light is comforting, its warmth is felt. But over time, those who live in the room stop noticing it. They move around without acknowledging its glow, assuming it will always be there. Only when the candle is finally extinguished do they realize the darkness it once kept at bay. This is what happens when you offer kindness without limit. Your presence becomes assumed rather than valued, and only in your absence do people recognize what they had. Marcus Aurelius reminds us, "Do not waste what remains of your life in speculating about your neighbors, unless with a view to some mutual benefit." This applies to generosity as well. If you spread yourself too thin, constantly trying to help everyone, you may find yourself exhausted, drained, and resentful. The very people you help may not even notice the toll it takes on you. True kindness is not about depleting yourself. It is about knowing when, how, and to whom to give so that your generosity retains its meaning. The solution is not to become selfish or unkind, but to be mindful of how you distribute your energy. Respect your own limits, and others will learn to respect them too. If you do not set boundaries, people will assume you have none. If you never say no, people will assume you are always willing. And if you do not protect your time and emotional well-being, no one else will do it for you. Kindness is most powerful when it is given as a conscious choice, not as a reflexive habit. A Stoic does not seek validation through endless giving, nor does he fear that setting limits will make him less generous. He gives because he chooses to, not because he is expected to. And in that choice, his kindness remains something of value, something that, when given, is truly appreciated. True respect is not earned by being endlessly available, but by understanding the value of your kindness and offering it with intention. When you give without limits, without boundaries, your generosity risks becoming something others assume rather than appreciate. People value what is rare, what is given with thought, what is not taken for granted. Just as a flame must be tended to keep burning, your kindness must be protected so that it remains a true gift, not a silent sacrifice. It takes strength to be kind in a world that does not always recognize it, but it takes even greater wisdom to ensure that your kindness is not misused. Setting boundaries does not make you selfish. It makes your generosity sustainable. Respect is not about how much you give, but about how consciously you choose to give. Have you ever felt that your kindness was overlooked or exploited? Have you found a way to balance generosity with self-respect? Share your thoughts in the comments. Stand your ground. Your experience may help others who are walking the same path. If this video resonated with you, show your support by liking and subscribing. The next video will reveal a powerful truth about human nature, one that could forever change how you approach respect, relationships, and self-worth. Until then, stay strong, stay wise, and remember, true kindness is not just about giving, but knowing when to give.